It's time for today's Tech Coach with Keith George, the Big Tech Coach. This is the podcast for instructional technology coaches and the teachers they support. Here's our host, Keith George.
Hello, everyone. I am Keith George, and this is today's Tech Coach, the podcast for technology coaches and the teachers they serve. We are very happy to have you join us for our first full episode of today's Tech Coach. I am joined by Mark Coleman. Mark is a longtime friend, and he's the District Technology Coordinator for Montgomery Public Schools here in Alabama.
Technology instructor, not coordinator.
Okay.
He's my boss.
He's the boss. Okay. That's
Exactly.
I actually know him as well. So the District Technology Teacher or Instructor, is that what they call it? And that actually
District Technology Instructor.
And that's actually
There's
an
two of
interesting
them.
point to lead off with this podcast because we're calling it today's Tech Coach, but we are well aware that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of titles for the educators that perform this role across the country. I'm actually working on some research, and I've identified up to now 21 different titles just in Alabama.
I was about to say you sound like a man who is trying to quantify some things about it.
Yeah, Mark and I are both PhD students working in instructional technology, so that's actually one of the first ways that we really started this friendship that we have. But we are going to be talking about a variety of technology topics, technology coaching, all the different aspects of education technology. It's hopefully going to be a conversation among friends that we have. Hopefully you'll find it beneficial to you as well as interesting and occasionally entertaining. Mark is the king of snark, so we'll have to keep him in check every once in a while.
But I mean things from the bottom of my heart. I'm not being snarky. I'm just trying to find the humor in some sad situations sometimes.
And in education, and especially in education technology, those situations seem to crop up quite a bit, don't they?
Quite a bit. There's always things not working like they should, things being ended that you were dependent on, new migrations. Just there's tons of things to worry about and try and find the humor in.
Yeah, and we actually have some experiences with that. It doesn't matter how many times you test something prior to it. We're doing a presentation that I believe you were attending, Mark, and I was one of the people in charge of the presentation, and we had tested everything we possibly could, and then the power went out in the entire building. So sometimes you just have to kind of be flexible and be nimble, as they say.
Exactly. Technology making our lives easier.
Yes, every day. That should be a T-shirt. All right, well, as we were kind of preparing for this first episode, we actually have a great guest that is a pre-recorded interview for us that we'll be pulling in a little bit later. That's Jacqueline Stevens from the Friday Institute up at North Carolina State University. She's done a lot of work with instructional coaches, instructional technology coaches, and we pre-recorded an interview with her a couple of days ago to pop in just because of scheduling. And so we'll have that just a little bit later. But one of the things that we talked about, Mark, is recently Microsoft announced what they are calling Classroom, not to be confused with Google Classroom, because we certainly don't want
or
confusion.
Apple Classroom.
Or the Apple Classroom app, that's correct. And that's Microsoft's entry into I almost want to call them pseudo LMSs. You've done a lot of work with LMSs. Kind of give us just a definition of that broadly.
I like to look at a learning management system as granted, we think about them as being web-based now, but some technology that enables teachers to generate content from their students, to accept work from their students, allow students to collaborate and create for them. And I'm glad you used the word pseudo LMS, because as we were talking about this and I was developing my thoughts of it, I was thinking about things like Google Classroom and Apple Classroom. When I heard the term Apple Classroom, my first instinct was, this is a learning management system. I will not be surprised to see Apple graft that functionality onto Apple Classroom in the future, but now it's more of just a iPad management system. Google Classroom also is a pseudo LMS in ways because it's almost a Google Docs management system. There's no testing module. It's not quite a full-formed LMS like we know, like the big boys like Moodle and Blackboard and Schoology and Canvas and Desire to Learn, and the names go on. But those are pseudo LMSs. They approach it the companies I just named, like Moodle, which is open source and not really a company, Blackboard, Schoology, Canvas. They all have testing engines. They all have ways to turn in content for teachers to disseminate content, discussion boards, blogs, all these sorts of functionality. So as teacher can do a distance classroom, or as I'm more familiar with, a blended classroom model where we have an actual students coming to a classroom sort of situation that is supplemented by the learning management system. I was paperless in my own class for almost a decade, starting back about 2005, 2006. And I would distribute content to my students that way. They would turn in their work that way. They would get involved in discussions. And so that's what the world generally views as LMS. I can go online, take a test, or turn in my paper, or find the resources.
Well, and that's an interesting point because what are the requirements to be an LMS? I know that I think, as most of the listeners that have stumbled across our podcast probably know, I work with the Alabama Department of Education, and up until recently was part of the Office of Educational Technology, and the distance learning program there, and recent state laws actually required an online component for every graduating student. But what was interesting about that is the way it defined an online experience, because it required the use of an LMS, but then it got into the discussion of what makes an LMS. I actually moments ago finished a Edmodo certified trainer webinar. That's something I'm working on, and Edmodo was incredibly popular, and it's an incredibly powerful tool. But they themselves, even though they have the ability to turn in assignments and take quizzes and grade them, they themselves articulate that they are not a learning management system. They don't consider themselves.
Do you remember when Edmodo was Twitter for the classroom or Facebook for the classroom? That was their big thing, and it's like they grafted these LMS features onto the side of it. Me personally using Edmodo, which I think is a real powerful tool, and if that's your preferred, quote, LMS, go for it. But it just seems like the LMS functionality sits off in its little side cupboard to do it.
Yeah, and I'm not going to do an Edmodo commercial right now, but it's something that I've used, and I've used many of the others too. You're right in that they started as a collaborative communication tool, and they still push that. They actually have now functionality for users to submit and share educational resources. So there's actually a little bit of a teacher pay teachers element to it now in a feature called Spotlight. But you're right. They have the functionality that allows you to confuse them, for lack of a better term, as an LMS. But they're very clear that they're not trying to be an LMS. And I think that's where I was thinking with this conversation, because where is Google in that? So Google Classroom of those kind of bigger ones, Apple, Microsoft, Google Classroom's been around the longest. There are some significant limitations to it if you're trying to consider it as your sole LMS.
And the lack of a good testing engine being primary above.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one. I think what Google would argue is that the ability to add in third-party solutions can benefit that. I'm probably not pronouncing the name of this I guess feature now, but Synergize
yes,
was a tutorial, a Google Classroom tutorial.
actually Docs and Drive, the
Right.
whole ball game.
But it primarily was used for if you were a Google Apps for Education school system, or if you were a business that used Google for Business. It allowed for the local creation of tutorials, interactive tutorials, to help your users learn how to use the functionality of, in our case, Apps for Education. And it was a pay feature. And 2 weeks ago, they announced that they had been purchased by Google, and thankfully, in the very same blog post, announced that they would also be free forever. So what had been a subscription feature was absorbed by Google and is now a free feature. So is that what might be down the road for some other prominent Google Docs, Google Apps for Education features, i.e. Flubberoo?
Flubberoo is such a part of the Google Apps environment now. Everywhere you go that has an established base of Google Apps for Education users, they all talk about Flubberoo. I can see that being the engine that drives a Google testing module. Also, things like Doctopus and Gubrick to just build the rubrics right into your Google Docs. If they don't outright purchase these, which I'm not sure of if those are open source or developed by a company. I think they're developed by someone. So Google could purchase those and bring that functionality right into Google Classroom without it being a plug-in. I can see that being the future, which I also have the question while we're talking about Google and Apple and Microsoft. And then we have the historic big names, Blackboard, Moodle being open source, Schoology, Canvas. Where does that leave room for an upstart company? I, about a year ago, test drove this really nice little sleek minimalist LMS called WEO, W-E-O. And it's nice. I still get their updates, but it looks like Google Classroom without the super tight integration of Google Docs and Google Drive. Where's there room for a company like that to grow? Who pays money for a service from these little guys? I mean, like most of these services, individual teachers can sign up for free. But as a school, why do I purchase this from a little guy when I have these big name options? If I was looking for a Google Classroom clone, Google Classroom's free. So why not just take it? But if I'm looking for a full featured LMS, why do I pay for one that's an untested feature and not Schoology or Canvas?
Well, and that actually leads into the what is the end game for all of these companies. With Canvas and Blackboard, they want to sell you their LMS. That's very, very clear what their goal is. They are selling it system to system. So, for our listeners, you, as an instructional technology coach or a teacher, you may at some time be asked to test drive some of these things, but your decision-making power in it is probably limited, and you have to understand that the choice of a full-featured LMS may be a little bit out of your control. When you start thinking about Google, what is their end game for providing apps for education for free?
I don't. Some parts of it, I'm sure there are wiser folks than I at Google, lots of them actually, that have worked out these business models. But I know the whole idea of Google Apps for Ed is to get people used to that ecosystem. So Google Apps for Business is a no-brainer as people are leaving education going up like that. But things like Classroom, like Flubberoo, like as just an add-on for the Google Apps experience, sure, I get it, but I guess there's a business sense to them. It's hard for me to believe that the entire Google education ecosystem is merely a large commercial for a captive audience for Google Apps for Business. It's hard for me to think that that's just it.
Right, and I guess this may be a good time for a disclaimer. I am a Google certified educator, but you actually have a few more credentials with those.
I've got Educator 1 and 2, but I'm also a Google Certified Innovator, Google Teacher Academy, class of 2012, New York class. And as of today or tomorrow, I finished my application for Google Certified Trainer. I'm doing it sort of backwards. Most of my Innovator cohort, which was Google Certified Teacher at the time, were already Google Certified Trainers when they showed up for New York. But I hopefully will be in this next cohort of Google Certified Trainers. So.
Right, and I, like many others, am working towards some of those additional certifications as well. But when I heard that Microsoft was introducing a I don't know, what do you call them, a system of classroom?
A platform.
A platform. That's probably the best term. I was already aware and had done some administrative setup for what was called the Microsoft for Schools. Basically, when you get apps for education from Google, you get special access to docs and Drive and sheets and slides and all of that, and you have unlimited storage and things like that. Microsoft has a similar platform for schools where you can adopt it, and it instantly provides access to Office 365 for all of the users, including a home install for students and teachers. And we went through that as far as the program I was in at the time at the State Department, basically so that we could test, understand, demonstrate, provide guidance to schools and districts on. And so I have a little bit of experience for that. And both of those, Google and the Microsoft, center around being kind of server-based as far as they want access to your domain. You have to verify that you have a domain. And then you get access to all of these features for free. But one of the first things that they want you to do is actually funnel your email through them.
Well, we're not doing our email through them.
Right, that's what I was getting ready to say. There are some ways where you can skirt around that, but when we had both Google Apps for Education and Microsoft installed, it did present some confusion if you're not doing them for email, because now you have the dueling accounts. You have kind of a Microsoft Live account to get access to those features, and then a Google account to get access to those features. And I think this kind of centers back to the idea of a pseudo LMS, because again, these are not services that Blackboard is providing. They're not giving you access to a full Office productivity suite. In fact, most of those are trying to push integration with these one or more of these others.
I think it's interesting that we've just had a conversation about LMS for 15 minutes now, and this is the first time Blackboard's really come up.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Blackboard, sometimes the Google apps feel pieced together. For those of us who've been around tech for a while, we watched them grow. We saw Gmail, 10, 11 years ago. Another year later, there comes Calendar. A couple of years later, there comes Sites. Another couple of years, there comes Docs. And we've seen them evolve from all these different pieces into this suite we know now. With Blackboard, I'll be quite honest. I have said some very unflattering things about Blackboard, both as a user on the student side, a user on the teacher side, and a person who dislikes their business model. The whole, we're going to patent the learning management system that their Desire to Learn's lawsuit against them a decade ago so wiped out. But the whole idea that they were going to patent learning on the web really left a bad taste in my mouth. But they grew by taking all these different companies, buying them up, and grafting their services on together. In fact, I noticed in one of our classes at the University of Alabama, where we're working on our PhDs, that one of the URLs had the term WebCT in it. WebCT was the first LMS I ever used back around the turn of the millennium. And it they bought that and started buying other little companies and grafting the pieces. And it's sort of like I tried to build a car out of pieces I found at the junkyard of all these different models. Yes, it'll work, but it's a clunky, ugly thing. And
well, if I can interrupt right there,
sure.
Is that not something that we fear about Google? It's just that the different pieces are Google products, but may or may not be the same team. So is that something that Google at least has to be cautious about?
I think Google is all about standards, especially in-house. So they know how they've standardized their APIs between the apps. This is the way data is going to be output here. And it's easier for them to make it more seamless to, for example, Classroom got calendar integration very tightly a few months ago, I think at the beginning of this school year. That was done really well and really easy because they're controlling the APIs. They have all the documentation. When you're going out and buying a third-party company and bringing it in-house, there's less standardization of the way these apps are going to talk to, and you sort of have to do a Rube Goldberg way sometimes. And that's what I get when I deal with Blackboard. With all these companies we've been talking about, I mean, Blackboard is the 800-pound gorilla, especially at the post-secondary level. I wonder about their future. Why, as a college professor, and we both adjunct several at different universities around, why, as a professor, would I use something like Blackboard when I have something that might suit my needs much easier with Google Classroom? And we already have Google Apps for Ed in most of these universities.
Well, we know the answer to that. That's because it's been adopted by the university because of a great marketing, department at Blackboard and Canvas.
No one got fired for buying IBM. No one got fired for buying Microsoft. No one got fired for buying Blackboard.
Yes, and so therein lies the challenge. We did mention Apple, and you made a great distinction in that all three of these products are called Classroom, and yet they have very distinct goals in mind. Apple is, and for our listeners, I am the Mac guy, and I'm a reformed Windows user, and I say that jokingly because I used to be the one that would make fun of Apple and was constantly criticizing them, and then I kind of became changed teams, and what is it they say? There's no greater zealot than a convert.
Once you go Mac, you never go back.
Yeah. Okay. But and I'm a heavy iPad user, and I've had to deal with iPad management, and I actually know, Mark, that's something that you're having to start dealing with a little bit. And we're not going to get into the.
Was the iPad your gateway drug?
Yes, probably, but because of the adoption of iPads for a particular program and the need to manage them, I ended up with a MacBook at exactly the same time. So I will admit that I had a MacBook for 6 or 7 months and rarely used it, and because of a specific need, had to force myself to start using it just to get comfortable with it, really in order so that I could provide training to others. And once I really, used it as my day-to-day driver, it kind of grew on me very, very quickly. Apple Classroom does seem more like a mobile device management system. It seems to be an extension to.
It seems like an MDM. It seems like an MDM on a classroom level. It's the way to manage the devices on the classroom level.
Yeah, help me on the Apple MDM, the built-in that they provide.
You're the Mac guy.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank. But, it was for actual distribution and installation, and there are many, many flaws. There are a lot of third-party apps that have tried to fill that. Very few of them have done it successfully, in my experience. And I honestly was one of those that was waiting on Apple to take care of this problem themselves. With Classroom, it has some of those features that you need to manage them Apple Configurator. I had to look because it was going to drive me crazy. Apple Configurator. It has some of those distribution of apps features. It has some very school-specific features. Not only can you distribute the apps, but now you can take them back. So as students graduate and things like that. But it also provides some functionality of the student management functions that are kind of flashbacks to when we had computer labs, where you can now see all of the iPad screens while the students are working.
I told somebody, I got a demo of it a few weeks ago, and I told somebody, do you remember Synchronize, where we could see everybody's screens and lock them out? It's that for your iPad,
and
which has really got some people excited.
Well,
exactly.
But how does that fit into learning management? That's student management. I understand that. That's classroom management. I haven't heard Apple try to describe it as a learning management feature. So are we just misapplying?
That's a matter of time. I think this is just me, and once again, there are wiser heads at Apple than mine. But I think Apple needs to buy Schoology. I think Schoology is a very Mac feeling LMS to begin with, that it would integrate well with all their platforms, and I think they need to buy it and that be the Apple Classroom or the Apple School or whatever they want to call it.
That's interesting. I had not thought of that. Apple does.
Schoology is not a big player.
Boy, wouldn't that change it though if Apple.
It's not a huge player. It's one of those that does have business. It's got an established base. There are schools here locally that use it. But I think that would be just a great fit, because I think Schoology is a very sleek and elegant in the way Mac OS X is. And I'm not an anti-Mac guy. I used Mac a lot during the whole Power PC transition time. They left our school, and if I have to equip my entire family with computers, I'm going to go ones I can fix myself and be on a budget. So we're a PC household. But I like Mac. I love the sleekness of the interface, and Schoology reminds me of Mac. It feels like it should be part of Mac. I think that when that happens, I will call this episode up and say you heard it here first.
Buy stock now. I guess that's one of the interesting things too. Is as I started to mention earlier, when you think of Google with Classroom, I think people will argue if Google, what kind of company are they? Are they an advertising company? Are they a services company? They're advertising. Some hardware, and for the most part they are. So I think we acknowledge that in part, not necessarily with evil in mind, but part of their goal is to get you entrenched into the Google ecosystem. It's a similar strategy to I had somebody that was a law student, and LexisNexis and Westlaw, some very incredibly powerful research tools, are absolutely free to law students because they want to get them.
They want them to subscribe in their own firms,
right? And those subscriptions, once you graduate, are in the thousands and thousands of dollars. So they are trying to hook you. Maybe that is Google's sole purpose. Maybe it is a philanthropic idea of give something back because we are this big player, and if that gets people used to Google, great. I think Microsoft has gotten into the space to sell software, and my pause there is I have actually even done some blog posts on how I have been impressed lately with Microsoft's rededication to software anywhere. You can go to the iOS App Store, and I think when I did the blog post, when you search for Microsoft as a producer, as the author of the software, there were something like 50 apps for iOS that were produced by Microsoft.
And I love the one you recommended to me for calendar for my iPhone. I'm a 2-phone guy. I carry an iPhone and an Android, iPhone and a Nexus 6P. And I love Sunrise. I think that's great. And I know that's one they bought.
And I got bad news for you. They just
Yes.
updated the Microsoft Outlook app for iOS with the very similar look and feel of Sunrise. And blog post 2 days ago, Sunrise will sunset in August. So it's going away.
Ashes
but
to
that's
ashes.
the reason. That's the reason they bought it, and I think that goes back to, Google possibly purchasing some of these others, Apple purchasing Schoology, something like that. So Google is trying to get you entrenched in their system. Microsoft they want you to buy software, but at the same time, if you adopt it as a school, they're actually giving you the software.
I think it's a struggle for relevance on Microsoft's part. I mean, the whole fact that here in 2016, let's go back a decade to 2006 and realize that most of the OSs we're using are not Microsoft Windows based, but they're truly Unix based. The iPhones are FreeBSD or NetBSD, I forget which one. The Androids are Linux, and Chromebooks are Linux, and iPads are, like I said, back to BSD. And we're talking about all these OSs. I think Microsoft, it's not like they're going to go away, but I think it'll be like IBM. They just aren't the company of the zeitgeist anymore. And this is one of the scrambles to stay part of it.
Well, and I do think it's the distinction that the software that I indicated that they're kind of giving away to schools, that is Office 365. That is a online, somewhat online version of the Microsoft Productivity Suite, Word.
It's
Excel.
cloud-ish.
It's cloud-ish. It's very cloud-connected. Yes, you can download it and install it. But, you don't go to Office Depot and pick up a copy of Microsoft Office for $300 anymore. It's just like Adobe and several others have. It's subscription-based. How that model of subscription-based renting of software is going to play out, I don't know. If I did, I wouldn't, necessarily be in the job I'm in now.
I know I worry about micropayments personally. I no longer have a cable bill, but I'm paying $7.99 here, $9.99 here, and $80 a year here. And so I know how I worry about incrementally that creeping up. I can just imagine for schools, if we're paying, all right, Apple Classroom, you have to have the MDM for it, and that's $5 per seat per year. And then we're going to tack on a fee for your using the LMS of $6 per seat per year, et cetera, et cetera. These sorts of micro payments on a per seat basis, it's not like ed tech doesn't bleed school systems dry now. I can just imagine when the model changes and that thing we bought 4 years ago, we can't stretch another year out. We've got to re-up our subscription this year.
Well, and I think to my understanding, the pricing models for schools are the equivalent to the site licenses that we dealt with in the 90s and 2000s, as far as it is if you are 250 users and below, it's X amount. If you're 500 below. So when you're doing that, when you think of that from the vendor's point of view, if you're just basing it on the school population, you kind of know not everybody's going to be using it. Not everybody's going to be taking advantage of all the functionality. There's probably some built in to the price that, you're giving the school district significant discounts because not everybody's really going to be using it. Now, if you have enough of those and they're large enough, obviously they think they can make enough money that way. That's how they're doing it. It's when you kind of approach it as an individual that it looks to be more of the, like you were talking about, the $7.99 a month. I know that I have benefited from the fact that my employer has a contract with Microsoft, so I can get an installation of Microsoft for my home computer at no charge. My university at which I am a student, I can get an installation of Microsoft through them. I can, through the
Let's hear
university
for
that
being
I teach.
40-something and getting a student discount.
Well,
That's the best thing ever.
Yeah, and it's not even a student discount. It's at the university in which I teach, they offer it to students for free. And this is actually spreading. Edmodo. If you adopt Edmodo as a school, all of your students get access to Office 365 built into the subscription. So, it's going to be interesting to see how those companies make money. And I think this ties back to the LMS because that plays into the competition between the strictly LMS for-profit entities, Blackboard, Canvas, as opposed to these, I guess we've termed them pseudo-LMSs, that are more services-based, and this is a way to providing a LMS type functionality is a way to get you into their ecosystem. I mean, Google's the advertising. Microsoft is to sell software. Apple is to sell hardware. I mean, Apple still considers themselves a hardware company.
Well, everything there is to sell another iPad, to sell another iPhone, to sell another MacBook. But who we've left out of this entire conversation is the students. Do they care?
That's interesting. You're right. We left them out in a sense. Do they care? Some of them maybe. My big thing is even, as we've joked about me being the Mac guy or this and that, I've always, even when I was, a Windows guy, I've always known that there were certain professions and certain implementations in which you needed to use a particular platform. In that same vein, I think we're doing a disservice to our students if we don't expose them to all of these different platforms. I think a student should graduate high school having used a Mac, a PC, and a Chromebook.
They should be able to sit down behind whatever device you get them and figure out the basics. This is how I close an app. This is how I launch an app. This is how I find what apps are on here. And even I watch I'm no longer in the classroom, but last year I was, and I would watch my students transition between iPhone and Android and back, and they had a pretty quick learning curve on that. They'd cuss it for a while. They would say, this doesn't work like that, and where's this? But they could quickly transition. Chromebooks they got instantly. Those going between the Mac and PC world would see some difficulty. But granted, I was at a magnet school with some really just amazing kids, and I think they're all amazing when you want to get down to it. No matter what the school, there's going to be those kids that can handle everything. But it's interesting to see them just jump between platform now because the platform matters less to them. They like to make fun of Windows Phone, but beyond that,
But if you talk about the transition from a Windows user to a Mac user, there would be those that would argue that going from Windows 7 to Windows 10 was just as much of a struggle as somebody switching platforms. But one of the bigger questions here is when the kids that are in elementary school now, I have 14-year-old and a couple of 9-year-olds that are part of my inner circle, and you have two boys that
14 and 11.
So middle school and elementary school.
About to be high school and middle school.
Yeah, that's true. And you're showing the age too. When those 9-year-olds graduate, which we're only talking 8-9 years, when they graduate, will there still be Windows and Mac OS and Chrome OS? I mean, do we even know? Chrome OS didn't exist 8 years ago. It's the leading operating system in schools now.
And iPad's 6 years old, and they're everywhere I go.
Right. So, I mean, that's kind of the thing too, is the ability to be flexible. So this is a really interesting conversation. When you talk about learning management systems, it's kind of what do you really mean by that? If it's a full-blown learning management system, it's probably going to be decided by your district. As an instructional technology coach, it's probably going to be learn that system so that you can teach it to others and help implement it. And sure, you're going to come across the features that don't work the way you want. You may even know of a better solution, but sometimes you just have to, play the party line and talk encouragingly to the teachers, because, certainly our role as coaches, we want to be promoting the benefits of integration and getting our teachers towards that. And all of these, no matter which ones of these you choose, even Blackboard, Mark, would be better than no learning management at all, correct?
Definitely. That's the way learning. I go back to Ivan Illich and his learning webs from Deschooling Society, that learning can reside in non-organic machines, non-organic entities. And to have knowledge come to us through the line on the wall, it's something we all have to learn to manage. And an LMS is stepping into that. It's a guided, we've all taught ourselves things on the internet before. That's a skill, and an LMS is training wheels for that skill.
Yeah. And so, again, our role as coaches is to work with our teachers and help them integrate this. And, that comes in a variety of frameworks. I think everybody's probably familiar with the SAMR model, and use of an LMS inside the SAMR framework is a great analogy as far as how you can take those substitution steps and start moving forward. At its best.
I would argue that every level of the SAMR model you can approach in many of these LMSs.
Absolutely, and I think that was where I was heading with that, in that it can start with just substitution, but it certainly is going to, and has in its way, redefined education. And that's a great segue, because earlier this week I had the opportunity to interview Jacqueline Stevens. Jacqueline is a digital learning coach with the Friday Institute at North Carolina State University. And because of scheduling, we recorded the interview a couple of days ago. But she actually has done a lot of work with SAMR and has extended a different interpretation of it. And let's listen to that interview now and see what she has to say about SAMR as a swimming pool. We are thrilled to have Jacqueline Stevens with the Friday Institute, a digital learning coach and research associate over there at North Carolina State, with us. She's going to talk to us today about instructional technology coaching and some of the other aspects of that. So first, Ms. Stevens, why don't you tell us about the Friday Institute?
Sure. The Friday Institute for Educational Innovation is part of Extension and Outreach with the College of Ed at NC State University. And our role is to, through research and evaluation and professional development, support the transition for digital learning and teaching in K-12 schools across North Carolina.
And that's our special guest in the background there. Actually, the Friday Institute is where you and I first came in contact with one another, as I participated in the Coaching Digital Learning MOOC. You guys actually offer several of those. Tell us about those.
Our MOOC EDs are a massive open online course for educators, vary from content-specific courses to strategic courses or opportunities to connect with folks in an international stage about what's working, what strategies are we using, what resources and goals are there when it comes to these digital transitions for coaches, for teachers, for administrators and leadership. And there's something for everyone in these courses, and they're free. So that's at mooced.org.
Yes, and I was going to go ahead and mention, we will certainly be putting the link to the Friday Institute and those list of MOOC EDs in the show notes so that people can check those out, because you guys offer those repeatedly throughout the year, don't you?
Yes, we definitely coming this fall, and then again in February. We often have opportunities for folks to enroll, and class sizes are huge, but what's great about it is that it's at your own pace. So everyone, we're busy. Time is something we never have, especially in education. So folks can work at their own pace and connect and find what is going to work for them where they are in their initiative.
Yeah, and I will go ahead and say, from the participant point of view, having participated in two of those now, They were very, very beneficial. Certainly there were things that kind of I was already familiar with, but there was so much interaction and collaboration with the participants, and it certainly built up my professional learning network, so that's always a good thing.
Awesome. That's always good to hear.
Well, let's talk a little bit about instructional technology coaching. This is still relatively a new concept in education, and there's been an evolution of parts to it. So first off, let's just start kind of what do you see as an instructional technology coach at the school level?
At the school level, a coach is really a support. They are there to build the capacity of others in the building, be a listening ear, be a reflective colleague, and really build the trust and the culture within the building around the change with digital learning and teaching. They're not enforcement. They're not evaluative in the sense where, they're going to report back or you're doing it wrong kind of thing. And teachers are a little unsure about that when they know, okay, what do you mean you're a coach? And coaches aren't there to fix people or fix systems. They're there purely to be that supporting hand. They're there to meet those teachers where they are, and make opportunities where it really comes down to, student-centered learning and what does that look like. A lot of my conversations with coaches and teachers is digital learning and teaching. We know we need to change the way that we're teaching our kids, and the technology is the fastest and most progressive way to do this. If it was something else, we'd be doing it. So the coaches are really there to help, bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I know in my experience there has often been and this has actually been both between teachers and administrators, the coaches are kind of in that no man's land. They're not a teacher, but they also are not or should not be used for administrative purposes. So they kind of get stuck in that, well, where do I fit?
Right.
And so have you seen that? Have you had to deal with that at all?
A lot of times instructional coaches used to be in the classroom. They were classroom teachers, and they've gotten plugged into a new spot, a new role, and so they're figuring out their way. And there can be a lot of judgment from classroom teachers. Well, you're not in the classroom anymore. You don't understand. You don't know what I'm going through. A coach comes in and wearing that hat for support, and it can be difficult to just start building that trust that the coach's job is to do all of that searching and looking for those strategies and those tools and what's going to work best for their colleagues. So it's lifting that pressure off of teachers. Because when teachers hear that this is coming, they're going, I don't have time for that, So the coach is really there to be their lifeline. And we do see a gap between when it isn't working, a gap between that instructional coach for digital learning and curriculum and instruction coaches. Sometimes schools have two. They're treated separately. They really are like one and the same and are a team to work together. And it's like you said, it's all new. It's baby steps. They're figuring out not only their role and how to best do it, but to kind of break the perception that they're tech support in terms of fix it, but more curriculum and instruction support when it comes to digital learning and teaching.
Now, I find it interesting that you mentioned instructional coaches from, for instance, the other subject areas. In the South where I am, they're math coaches, they're reading coaches, primarily how they're termed. And it's interesting that those positions are really connected to the Jim Knight instructional coaching model and how important relationships are and that ongoing support. But yet, for us at least, technology coaches kind of are seen a little differently. They're not, it's not as expected for them to work under that same type of system. But I still think that the relationship for an instructional coach for an instructional technology coach is just as important, because they have to remember that those teachers are going to hesitate at times to work with them.
Yeah, it's really, you're not just coaching technology, you're coaching behaviors, beliefs, and ways of being, right? You need to tap into each individual in that school and find out where is their comfort level. I use the CBAM model, the concerns-based adoption model, as a way of just informally have conversations and listen. Where are their concerns? What are they worried about? And then you have a target to aim for. How can I best support you? So it's really is all about relationships. The technology, the tools and the stuff and facilitating that professional development is one thing, but knowing what to do and how to do it is crucial in building those relationships.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things over the last 2 months or so that I've had the opportunity to do repeatedly is to speak with administrators, principals, and superintendents about technology coaching. And I'll be honest, those conversations usually go down to two primary topics. The first one is my working with them to make sure that they don't try to use coaches as evaluators. They're not the secret spy to go in and let you know how Miss Jones is doing in the classroom. And then the second one is, how do I find a good technology coach? What am I looking for? Can you talk to that second point there? What kind of skills do you see as being needed to be an effective technology coach?
Having a knowledge, or at least of the discipline, is key. A lot of states now are requiring that coaches have a master's in being an instructional technology facilitator. You can't just tap into a tech-savvy classroom teacher anymore. So having that knowledge and that discipline, having a sense of what goes on in the classroom. Former classroom teachers are great coaches. They have to be open to a range of coaching approaches. Directive, cognitive, just as we are in the classroom with our kids, we need to differentiate. Be open to having a connected network. What does their PLN look like? Because as a coach myself, I don't need to have all the answers, but I have a great PLN that does, so that they're aware of the networks and resources that are out there. To be that listening ear, to be somewhat data-driven, right? Because the data is important, formal and informal data, and using that. Sometimes it feels like schools have too much data and they don't know what to do with it. But a coach really needs to hone in on what is important for them and for their staff. And, modeling, model. And that coach needs to not be afraid to go to the administrator and say, hey, you need to model too. This is not just coming from one person, but strategies that really build the culture to embrace this digital learning and teaching, that it's not mandated, it's not coming from one person, because I've seen some schools, if that coach goes away, the teachers go, well, it went with them. Yeah. So building that buy-in, coaches really need to have that grit and tenacity to just try and fail forward and show and model that it's okay. Like, hey, we tried it. It didn't work. Let's learn from it. I mean, that's where learning really happens. And it's kind of terrifying to have to tell teachers that, like, it's probably going to fail, and then that's going to be okay. So finding someone who is comfortable with that, who can build that trust and relationships, because it doesn't matter how tech savvy they are, if they can connect with the staff, they're really not going to make the headway that we see the success in these changes. It's all about a unified front and getting folks on board, and it's baby steps and being able to roll with the punches and finding out where their colleagues are at, meeting them where they're at, just as we do with our kids, and understanding what, having a sense of what adult learning looks like. So
I was just getting ready to add to that. It's interesting how much of your answer was not related directly to technology.
Because that's always a challenge, right?
We can learn the technology and we can keep up with that, but it's those relationships and that ability to teach adults. Because, and I'll do a little disclaimer because I know that you do it too, but I've done some adjuncting at the college level, but I still will repeat this often. We've all had that college professor that was an expert in their field, but they could not teach. And I think teaching adults is different than teaching children, and not every great teacher has it. So you really have to look for those outstanding ones that do. When you start implementing technology coaching in a school, what is kind of the model that should be implemented for it?
The very first thing we try to do, and at the district level and at the school level, what is your vision? You got to have a vision. It has to be easily to articulate and communicate, and that needs to be repeated ad nauseum. Like, everyone needs to get the vision and the mission. Why are we doing this? And not just the buzzwords or the educationese that we throw out there, but creating that solid foundation that this is a moral imperative for us as educators, for our students, for our communities to do this and open up, make our classrooms, these learning experiences, reflective of the outside world. It looks like real life. We're giving students opportunities that they didn't have before. We can differentiate in ways we haven't before. And we're building those soft skills that our students need in this very changing world. The technology has really changed the way our culture is, and is going to continue to do that. So building that foundation, creating that vision first. And then we say there needs to be a plan, because we can't just throw everything at these teachers and see what sticks. There needs to be a transparent plan that involves all stakeholders, the teachers, parents, invite students to create and craft a unique plan that's going to fit within the context of your school or that learning environment. If there was a checklist, we would be handing it out, but there isn't, right? We wish there was one. But every school is unique, every classroom is unique, and what plan is going to work for them, and what they're going to adapt, not adopt, right? It's not mandated, but what are they going to adapt to? So vision, plan, and then you got to implement. Try, see what works, and during that whole process, there's assessment. So it's very cyclical. Your vision is always going to be changing. You're going to be tweaking it as you move forward. What you plan is going to change and move forward. How you implement, you're going to try things. Things are going to work, things are not going to work. And you need to be prepared for that, because, not everything's going to run as smoothly as we hope. We know success isn't a straight line, but a big old squiggly mess. So planning, implementing, and constantly reflecting on that process, assessing the process. What is working? What do we keep? What do we drop? What do we lose? And what do we keep from our heritage practice? We're not just, technology is not replacing everything. It's supporting, coming up underneath and supporting the great things that we're already doing. So keeping that in mind.
Yeah, that's great. And you actually shared a great graphic with me that I will add to the show notes so that everybody else can benefit from that kind of covers that. And the thing I think I like about that model is it seems to work great as a district level or school level framework, but you could also think of this as a way to implement coaching one-on-one with a teacher, because you're still going to start with that vision. What are you wanting to accomplish, and plan and implement and assess. So it's really a great model to kind of look at. And so we'll be sure to share that in the show notes.
Yeah, and I failed to say, in that model, at the very center of it is student learning.
Right.
So no matter what you're thinking about or the decisions that are being made, and sometimes it's really easy to go off track for what's going to work, for me as a teacher. But if I always remember to go right back to how will it impact student learning, I can't go wrong.
Yeah, and everybody has a similar story, but, a principal mentor of mine, every time I would come up with a new idea, his response was always, how is it going to help the students? And it actually got to the point where, especially with him, I learned to walk in the door with, here's how this is going to help the students, and now I'm going to tell you what I want to do. Mm-hmm. So that's always great to keep the students at the center.
And when it comes to your coaching model, I think that's exactly how you need to lead. That's your headline. This is how it's going to impact students. And that's really where you're going to get folks to not buy in, but embrace what you're trying to do.
And you do have the challenge of keeping that in mind, because you are working with other teachers, and you have to remember that it's not about the teacher, it's not about the coach. Even though you're working with them, it's still about how it's going to benefit the student. So that's great. I want to have you talk a little bit about a topic that we recently had in some of our EdTech coaching Twitter chats. We've been both participating in a slow chat for the EdTech coaches, ISTE, Twitter PLN, and recently we were talking about the SAMR model, and I think everybody's probably familiar with the SAMR model, And I look forward to meeting Dr. Rubin, if for nothing else, so that I can learn to pronounce his last name effectively, because everybody seems to stumble on it. But that's Rubin, I believe, Puntadora. Is that right? So
I say it Puntadora. So I don't know how we're both going to have to meet him and figure that out.
Well, side story. I actually saw him at a conference and recognized him and turned to the person that was with me and said, "That's who that is." And she said, "Go introduce yourself." And I said, "Wait, where is he now?" Because I couldn't find him again. So that's my brush with him that I kind of failed on, because I didn't jump on it as soon as I saw him. Anyway, so the SAMR model has been around for a while. I've done several presentations on it. I think every tech coach has done some work on it. But this is another thing that has kind of evolved over the last, probably with SAMR, probably just over the last 9 months to a year, into kind of not changing it, but kind of thinking of it differently. When I first learned SAMR, it was the ladder. And you wanted to climb the ladder, you wanted to teach above the line. We're not really focusing that way anymore. Tell us about how that's changed.
So when I was first introduced to the SAMR model as well, it was the ladder and the teach above the line concept. And I, as a coach and working with schools across North Carolina, I started sharing this model. I'm like, hey, this is a great way to assess the rigor of technology use that's being implemented in the classroom. And I just saw all these kind of educators' faces gloss over a little bit. They look kind of terrified. And I was like, okay, what? I was getting this feeling that you're not loving this model. Give me some feedback. And they just said, what do you mean teach above the line? So once we get to the top of the ladder, that sounds like a lot of work. And like they were intimidated by it, and rightly so, because to constantly be redefining learning every day is a Herculean task. I mean, it's what we want to do every day as teachers. But the real goal of the SAMR model is to be fluid. Some days substitution is exactly where you need to be in what you're teaching your students. You'll be moving up that substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition scale. So the whole idea of the line and the teach above the line idea was really just kind of losing the whole concept for teachers. They were just hearing teach above the line, and that was it. So what I've done is I just took the line away. So I'll share the model with teachers and go, and what if we do this one thing? Let's erase the line, and now what do you think about it? Let's treat it like Bloom's taxonomy, where you're going up and down a scale, and whatever is going to best support students' needs in that learning context for that day, where are you on the SAMR scale? And then teachers would go, oh yeah, we could do that. I mean, you could just visibly see them relax. So this is how I share the model with them now. I take the line away, tell them to think about it in Bloom's taxonomy, and that in more of a fluid sense, I was inspired by Carl Hooker's SAMR swimming pool, and I've tweaked it a little bit. And we're swimming laps. We have to go back and forth. And as a coach, if I'm noticing that a teacher staying in the shallow end of substitution an awful lot, I'm going to throw every flotation device, be it a PLN, be it a resource, floaties can I give them to help them swim out a little further and try something else. If I'm seeing, my educators doing cannonballs into the redefinition deep end and they're treading water there so often, I'm going to go in and check on their mental health, right? Like, how are you guys doing? You're treading water. This is pretty deep stuff. How are you doing? Because we know teacher burnout is a real reality, and making sure that they're okay and they have the supports that they need, even though they're swimming in the deep end. So the coach, in a sense, is you're the lifeguard. You want everybody to jump in the pool, and not everybody's going to jump in at the same place. Everybody swims a little bit differently in the technology waters. So the metaphor of swimming, of the flotation devices, some educators are going to be covered in them, and some don't need as much. That it's really resonating with other educators. They get it. It seems less scary or intimidating, and it is something that they can feasibly reflect on, because really it's just reflective. When our students use technology today, where was it on the scale? And am I enhancing, which is awesome, or am I even transforming? So where am I on the scale? So it's it's all good, and it helps. Coaches have really found, I've gotten feedback from coaches that have shared the SAMR model in this way, that teachers have responded well and are very open to thinking about, swimming in that deep end when it's appropriate for them.
Yeah, and I will fully admit that I've shared a ThingLink interactive picture that you did, that I'll put that in the show notes as well. I've shared that often, and if I ever feel like I'm not getting a lot of attention on social media, on Twitter, I will just throw that picture up, just because I know that it's going to get a lot of likes. And you're always credited and everything like that, but it doesn't do a little bit for my self-esteem. And I will say that I know that you kind of base that on Carl Hooker's work, but I think every experienced tech coach that sees that has a bit of a duh moment, where they just go, duh, that is such a great analogy. Why didn't I think of that? Why? Because the idea of being able to go deeper in the pool, because you can have a lot of fun in the deep end, but nobody really stays there the whole time. You are doing the swimming laps, and it's just kind of making sure that you're doing those laps back and forth between shallow and deep, and not just side to side in the deep end, so that you're getting some experiences for the kids.
And we even tell coaches, you may be Olympic technology swimmers, but Olympic swimmers need to swim the deep end, or the shallow ends, every once in a while too. So it's a flow. It goes back and forth, and yeah, it is kind of like, oh, well, duh. That is what the model is about. And when it's represented as steps or a ladder, just culturally, as a culture, who doesn't want to be at the top? So we feel like we need to stay there. So when it's become more of a fluid model with the pool, it's helping folks really realize what it's about.
And I think it's a great model, too, because even, thinking back to our college days, when we first saw blooms as the triangle, we still were trying to get to the top. But as the more recent revisions of it have come out, and it's more of the circular kind of, here's where everything fits in, it's much less stressful for teachers and then on up to coaches to think of it as you're going to be at different places on this model at different times. So that's great. Well, Jacqueline, it has been great to have you. We really appreciate you coming by. We want to make sure that everybody can get in touch with you. Where can people find you in your work?
The best way to actually contact me is on Twitter at Jacqueline B. Stevens, and the professional Leading and Learning Collaborative at the Friday Institute is where I'm at. But we're, as coaches, my whole team, we're very open. We love to answer questions. We love to be supportive. That's why we do this. So we encourage all to reach out, questions and ideas. And I'm at jlbell at ncsu.edu.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I hope we can have you back. It's always great to see you on Twitter and have those conversations, but it's also great to have the opportunity to speak with you live and to share things here with our group. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that was Jacqueline Stevens, and we actually will hear back from her shortly when we do our EdTech recommendations. She helped us by providing a recommendation as well, and we'll do those in a couple of minutes. But, she talked about changing SAMR from the original interpretation of a ladder that you tried to climb to the top of to that of a swimming pool where I loved her line about that you're doing laps in the pool, and sometimes you're in the deep end and sometimes you're in the shallow end, but you're moving and you don't get stuck. You're staying afloat. As long as you're staying afloat and swimming, you're making progress.
Depth seems to be the metaphor du jour, especially with DOK being on everybody's tongue with CCRS and Common Core.
Yeah, depth and rigor. Those are certainly our buzzwords, and they're vitally important. And it's incredibly important that we provide that to our students, kind of circling back to our what might they be using when they graduate, the depth and rigor of what we are doing in the classroom provides that basis for them to be able to adapt. It's more about the critical thinking and less about the how.
Learning how to learn.
Absolutely. Well, this has been some great conversations. One of the things we're going to try to do each show is some recommendations, and these can come in a variety of forms, as far as recommendations for something related to EdTech. And, of course, everything has to have a cute name now, so we're going to call these EdTech Recs. Got to find me an artist to do a little dinosaur with an iPad or something. So EdTech recommendations. Mark, why don't we hear from you first?
A lot of times when I'm recommending apps for teachers, it's not just about changing your instruction and moving up the SAMR models. A lot of times when I recommend things to teachers, it's about making their lives easier as educators. And so I saw this app the other day. I saw it on Android Police, and it is an Android only. So you can find it in the Play Store, and it's called Voicey, and that is spelled Voisi. And at its most basic, it is a recorder app. And those apps we've used those for any number of purposes, and a lot of them are built into Android and iPhone. But the thing I liked about Voicey is, yes, the app itself is free. There's a subscription model, and I believe it was $2.99 a month or $30 a year. So not incredibly expensive, but it automated transcription of everything you're recording. It put in your notification bar, it has a thing to turn on the recording, and you can turn it on for your phone calls and record your phone calls and get a transcription of those. So when you want documentation of that call with a parent, there you go. It also, if you just pull down the notification bar and hit record, it records what you're saying in your classroom. So if you've got a student that has a 504 or an IEP or a homebound student, and you need to record what's going on in the class, not only do you get the recording, but you can get the transcription. And the reviews say the transcription is very good, not perfect, but very few transcription services are yet. But it's a real boon to be able to say you have to provide all this documentation for your 504 or IEP students, that you can record it and give a printout. There are many uses for that in the classroom. And so I felt like that's one of the things that can make a teacher's life a little bit easier. And that was Voicey, Voisi recorder. And that's at voicey.com or in the Play Store.
And we will have links to all of these in the show notes, and we'll show you how to get to those too. While you were talking, though, our lawyer did call to remind everyone to follow local laws when you're recording telephone conversations. That's not always something you can do. But what struck me is,
I live in a one-party consent state, so there you go.
So what struck me about that is for that monthly or annual fee, it is unlimited transcription.
That is correct.
Wow. I'm wondering if there are some PhD students that have interviews in their future that might be able to. We digress.
Yes.
So let's hear from Jacqueline. Jacqueline actually went a little old school with us, and she has a book recommendation for us. So let's hear from her. Okay, when we had Jacqueline on earlier, we actually grabbed her for a couple of extra minutes to see if she had an ET Rex and EdTech recommendation. So Jacqueline, do you have anything for us today?
Yeah, so in our conversation about coaching, I was thinking about Elena Aguilera's book, The Art of Coaching, which is awesome. Her website also has tons of resources for coaches that are just fantastic, lots of templates and things that you can use and adapt for your needs. She's also just come out with a new book, The Art of Coaching Teams, which I have not read yet, but I want to read because when you think about a coach for a district, you have some coaches that they are responsible for a whole school district. What does that mean? So I would highly recommend Elena Aguilera's books for sure.
That sounds great. We should make that a book study because that's on my ever-growing Amazon wish list as well. And we will throw a link to that in the show notes for The Art of Coaching Teams. And thanks for that recommendation.
Thanks.
That's a great recommendation. I actually have read The Art of Coaching, and so The Art of Coaching for Teams that has come out is something I'm really looking forward to getting a hold of, and we'll put a link to that.
When I'm Dr. Coleman, maybe I'll read something for fun.
Well, and I for the purposes of this podcast, I have luxury of my dissertation revolves around educational technology coaching, so I can kind of get double duty. The problem is I just have a stack of things that I'm trying to read, all related to it. So my recommendation, I actually had a tough time, so I am going to splurge and provide two recommendations for us. The first is a incredibly helpful tool for tech coaches, Mark, how many times have you explained how to log in to a service to teachers or students?
Daily.
So wouldn't it be nice if you could do a very, very quick, easy screen capture recording, video recording of how to do the various steps of how to log into a site or how to access a particular resource or things like that. Now, we've been able to do screen capture for a long, long time, but if you've used any of the high-dollar programs such as Camtasia, even their kind of low-budget version called Jing, they can be cumbersome. So if you are a Chrome browser user, I want to point you to a great little extension called Screencastify. And Screencastify is a great screen recording app. It does require you to have the Chrome browser, and it is a Chrome extension. But
well, if you're not using the Chrome browser, why not?
Yeah, that's a good point. But what's interesting is, even though it's a Chrome browser extension, once you have activated it, you can actually record anything on your screen. So you just kind of have to have Chrome, the browser, running in the background. But this extension will let you record everything on your screen or tabs of your browser with literally 2 clicks. You click the extension, it shows you the settings if the microphone is still set from the last time and you don't need to change whether it's the tab or the whole screen that you're recording. You click the extension, you click the record button, and immediately it is recording. And you go ahead and do whatever you're doing on your screen. It's recording your voice as well. It has the option of putting the little talking head picture-in-picture using your webcam. If you are working with students that may be more comfortable seeing you while you do that, you can add that functionality. And once you are done with it, you click the extension a second time, stop recording, and immediately it is saving the video to your desktop and has a one-click option to share it onto YouTube and make that available to your teachers or your students, whichever the case may be. Great for those little repetitive instructions so that when the teachers ask you for the 4th time how to log into the gradebook system or how to change their password on Edmodo or any number of those things that you have to explain over and over, you can just shoot them a link to that video that you've already created, and they can watch it anytime, and you're saving yourself some time.
And you can export that to YouTube or wherever?
Yeah, it will actually automatically load to YouTube for you, and it even works if you set up a separate YouTube channel. You can tell it where to go.
Awesome.
And, so it's really convenient. The second one is actually particular to coaching, and I stumbled across this a couple of weeks ago, and it is I'll make it for your Android-only app. This is an iPad-only app, but it is a coaching observation tool. It's called iObserve, but contrary to the norm, it is EYE, observe. It's not the lowercase I, but iObserve. And it actually was done from one of the universities. I'm drawing a blank on which one now. But it is a video capture app that also has built-in rubrics to conduct walkthroughs and coaching observations, and even to an extent, teacher evaluations. It has 4 different rubrics built in. The design of it makes it look like additional ones could be added, but right now there is a coaching observation form. There's a technology integration form, and it's out of one of the universities in Texas, I believe, and it has kind of a very state-centric teacher observation. So that particular one might not be useful to everybody, but that coaching observation form is great. When you go in for that first visit to observe a teacher, kind of get a feel of what they're doing, lets you both kind of score them on a rubric, not for evaluation purposes, but just for a formative assessment to help them. But it lets you get those notes, but it also lets you instantly record video. So when they're doing something that you want to be able to show them that they're doing, nothing tells the truth better than the camera. So If they're doing something great, you want to record that and capture it. If they're doing something that they may need to address later, you can record that. So it's
Can you output all this as sort of a package, like to share with different people or anything like that?
You can, as it is now, you can save it. Like I could do yours as, Mark's observations. And I would be able to refer back to yours and have those videos, and those would be separate from, the other teachers that I might observe and things like that. That does have a way to export. My current position is that I see these things and I see their value, but I haven't really had a chance to implement them. I need to kind of gain.
I would assume there was some sort of export functionality that or even cloud export or something like that.
Right, and there is. You do have to sign up for an account. The account is free, and the app was free through April 19th, but it's free still today. And it hasn't changed. And it says that it's going to be free for a limited time, but as of right now, it is still free in the App Store.
Hi, the To Yonder App Store.
Yes, head over there and get that. We'll have that link in the show notes as well. But it really looks like something that was developed academically or as part of a center or some sort of educational organization, and certainly has some commercial applications as far as it's something that they could sell, but hopefully they're going to keep that in a model that maybe they do the value-added services where the storage and things like that are where they try to monetize it, and they leave the app available for use. But it's a really great app. That's iObserve, great observation tool, something I had been looking for and trying to do just by creating Google Forms and things like that. So if you're able to share that easily with it, incorporating the video and things like that, it's going to be a great tool for instructional coaches. So those are some great recommendations. As I mentioned, all those will be available in the show notes. This is probably a good time to tell you about the blog at www.bigtechcoach.com. That is my blog, but on there you will find a tab for the show notes for today's Tech Coach, and we will have all of the links as well as the contact information for all of our guests and us that appear on the show will be there, as well as any other notes that we think of that to follow up. So be sure to check out the show notes at www.bigtechcoach.com. Mark, if people want to follow you, where can they do that?
I am J. Mark Coleman. That's Mark with a K, pretty much everywhere. JMarkColeman. I'm on Twitter as that.com as my website. I'm Mark at jmarkcoleman.com as my email address, or jmarkcoleman@gmail. That's where I am. I am midst dissertation. I hope to pick up my online publishing activity once I'm through writing for fun with my dissertation this summer. But generally, that's where I am.
And before I forget it, Mark, are you going to make it out to ISTE in Colorado?
I have booked my VRBO, my vacation rental by owner. I have a nice little house waiting for us in Denver. So, yes, I will be at ISTE. So,
unfortunately, go ahead.
I was about to say you can tweet me and we'll meet up. I know there's an ed coaching event that's going to be there. I'm going to be there. I think that's Monday night. The Google cohort is, of course, going to have a meeting, and if you're a Google guy that's certified things invited to those parties, I'll be there, and I might actually even do more than talk about and make ed karaoke this year.
Well, I was going to mention Jacqueline Stevens is certainly going to be out at ISTE, and she did want us to promote the EdTech Coaches, the ISTE EdTech Coaches PLN meetup out there. So I'm sure you'll be able to stop by there. I, unfortunately, at this point at least, it looks like I will not be able to make it to ISTE just because of some pre-existing trainings that we have here in Alabama. I think, as has been mentioned, I recently changed sections, and so I have had to kind of adapt to a existing schedule, the section that I joined. So I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. However, we're going to depend on Mark to gather some information for us there. And
Man on the street.
The man on the street. We'll get him to do some interviews. We'll stick take the GoPro and walk down the aisles of the exhibit hall for us.
I'll take some pictures at least.
Actually, Jacqueline has offered to do some kind of 2 or 3 minute little interesting recap kind of things, and we'll probably put at least a significant portion of a show, kind of a best of ISTE. As we travel to various conferences and stuff, we are going to try to do some recordings there. Let's see, ISTE, what are the dates for ISTE?
Last week of June.
Last week of June. So the first week of June is the Alabama Educational Technology Conference, which I will be there, and we are going to try to.
And I'll be presenting there. I'm doing tech tools for DOK there.
Oh, that's a good one. I'll have to make that one. I'm presenting as well. I think I'm doing some work on app creation with Participate Learning, I think is my session there. I'll also be at the North Alabama Technology Conference. We actually are lucky in Alabama. We have Tony Vincent that is going to keynote at AETC, and then a couple of weeks later, he's going to be right back at the North Alabama Technology Conference. So I've actually met Tony a couple times, and I'm certainly going to try to hit him up at AETC to get us an interview for the podcast to try to get him some time at NATC. So hopefully that'll work out. So we'll work on that. Also planning on being at the Georgia EdTech Conference in November, and at each of these things we'll try to do at least a little recap, and actually I'm trying to beat the deadline for the Future of EdTech Conference. It's the FETC, the old Florida EdTech Conference. They've renamed
that's right.
themselves.
I heard they were doing that.
So it's the Future of EdTech Conference, I think is what it is.
Well, that one was so big, it sort of defied just being a state one.
Right. And in all honesty, once I determined that ISTE was probably going to be out of the realm, I turned my focus to FETC because it's, if not as big, it's pretty close from what I understand, and I've never been to
and
it.
Drivable.
Never been to it before. Maybe able to even convince some folks to go with me as far as making a vacation out of it. There's some mice or something near there that everybody seems to like, so maybe I can convince folks to go with me there. So we want to thank you for joining us. Again, you can go to www.bigtechcoach.com to check out the show notes, check out the blog. I am at Big Tech Coach on Twitter and at Big Tech Coach on Instagram, which I don't do very much on, as well as I have a Facebook page. Most of all that just kind of transfers over to every place, but you can certainly get in touch with us there. But we want to thank you for joining us for today's Tech Coach.
Yes, definitely.
Please take a moment to leave us a review. These early episodes, we're going to ask you to keep that formative assessment in mind and help us get better. If there's things that you want us to cover, things that you think we left out, we'd love to hear your thoughts on LMSs and the SAMR model. If you're implementing it a little differently, if you've got some ideas to how to do that, we'd love to hear those. So please take a few minutes to stop by the website. You can find us on iTunes, as well as the audio, I think, loads up on YouTube through Spreaker. That's like speaker with an extra R in there. So that podcast will be available there too. But you can check us out on iTunes or go over to www.bigtechcoach.com and you'll find the links there. So for the first episode of today's Tech Coach, we thank you.
Thanks for joining us.